New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hi, my name is Dr. Deborah Lynn Katz. I'm a guest host on New Thinking Aloud, produced by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. And today I am bringing you an interview with somebody that I have been searching for over 15 years, and I'm not the only one. I'm talking about Prudence Calabrese, also known as Birdie. She is the author of Intentions, the Intergalactic Bathroom Enlightenment Guide. She is also the creator of a remote viewing methodology called Transdimensional Systems. And most recently, what we've learned in the last few months since she reemerged is that she has redeveloped this and rebranded it into a new name called Transdimensional Mapping, which she is offering to the public. And this is a modified version of controlled remote viewing, which was originally conceived of and created by Ingo Swann, Hal Puthoff, and others at the Stanford Research Institute, which, as many of you know, was the research arm of the U.S. Governmental military remote viewing programs, also known as the psychic spy programs. So today, we finally get to hear from Prue. We're going to hear about what happened, why she went AWOL, why she disappeared for all these years. We're going to find out what she was doing. We're going to find out what she is now bringing to the world and why she has returned. So please join us in this very unique interview. All right. So Prue, Birdie, I cannot believe that I am sitting here with you. I have been waiting for this moment ever since I first heard about you, which was probably about 14 years ago or so. And I have been fantasizing about the moment when I would get to talk to you and ask you so many questions. And I know that the questions I have for you are very similar to the ones that many others have for you as well. And both people who knew you back when you first got started, and then people who've come across your very insightful materials over the years. So we have so much to talk about, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm very excited to have this discussion with you today. I think it's going to be marvelous.
So starting off, could you tell us, how did you originally even get into the field of remote viewing?
I first learned about it the very day that it was publicly declared as declassified. Several of the military remote viewers were making the rounds on the television news shows, and I just happened to tune in. And there was this man with a blonde page boy hairdo, Major Ed Dames, and he was talking right directly into the camera about how he was trained to be a psychic spy, and that anyone could learn. And I thought, well, holy cow, I've got to learn that right away. And just coincidentally, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and Major Dames had just trained Dr. Courtney Brown, who was a sociologist at Emory University there in Atlanta. And Dr. Brown would go on to start a school for remote viewers. He called it the Farsight Institute. And I got involved with Farsight pretty much at the very beginning. And I traded website building skills and computer skills for taking the training with Courtney. And so I took one of the very first classes, civilian classes in remote viewing. There were about 15 of us in the class, and in 7 days, we all became psychic spies. It was amazing. And I took to it like a fish in water. It was just perfect. I understood it from the beginning, and I had these amazing experiences and was able to accurately draw the target or describe the target being the thing that you're asked to remote view. And I just loved it. I was at Farsight for a couple of years, and I eventually moved up the ranks and became the vice president at Farsight. And after a while, I wanted to do my own thing in remote viewing. And I didn't have problems with Farsight per se. I enjoyed all the people that were working there, but I really wanted to explore and try new things with the protocols and with really the whole philosophy behind it. And so I left and started my own company, Transdimensional Systems, and we would train thousands of people across the world. And we did. We had clients. We worked for a number of law enforcement agencies. We worked for corporations. A couple of celebrities hired us. We did all kinds of crazy stuff. It was so much fun. And a lot of people who are still active in remote viewing today came out of that whole tradition there at TDS. It was wonderful. And then eventually I left public life. Like you mentioned, I was harassed out of it. The government was harassing me, and some of the military remote viewers, some of their students were harassing me because I was considered an outsider in remote viewing. You had the military guys and their lineage and all of their students. They were kind of the insiders. Farsight was an outlier and I was an outlier. And but now I think the field is very different now, and I'm happy to be back in.
Yeah, we're so happy that you have returned. And let's break all that down a bit. So let's go back first to when you were starting your own business. What did you feel made it so your business was successful? How did you gain the attention of celebrities? Because I heard there were some pretty big names that invested.
Yeah, there were a number of things that were happening around this time. One of the big things is that back in 1998, I believe it was the end of 1998, we were looking at the next terror attack on the United States. Now, this was a few years before 9/11. And I was a viewer on this project. I always involved myself in the viewing. I wasn't like above everybody else. If I was going to be able to task people in my group, they were able to task me. It was just completely fair. And that's how I'm working on things today as well, now that I've returned. And so for the next terror attack in the United States, I drew the Twin Towers in New York and the Eiffel Tower. Not the Eiffel Tower, the Statue of Liberty. And it showed what I thought when I was drawing and describing this were two bombs that were flying in to the Twin Towers. Now, the bombs I drew had these little wings on them. So my mind was trying to tell me airplane, but because I didn't have a basis for ever even conceiving of that, no one did at that time, I drew what I thought were bombs, and I called them bombs in the session. And I forgot about it. It just kind of hung around. I think it made it into a report that we had put online at some point, and then we took it down. And then 9/11 happened, and people remembered that session, the description, the drawing, and it became the new nightly news after the terrible tragedy, the terrible event. And so TDS got a lot of attention. A number of news media outlets sent journalists and photojournalists to come take our remote viewing class. And every single one of them learned to remote view and had transformative experiences. there was a reporter from the London Sunday Times. They did a big magazine spread on us, and he literally broke down crying in class because he was having a full bilocation experience. And for those watching this that don't know what that kind of experience is, it's when you are so immersed in the experience of what's happening there at the target that you really feel things in a deeply visceral way. You might see and touch and smell and taste, and you know everything that's happening. It becomes very real to you. You get a strong emotional connection. And that's what happened to that one reporter. Even Cosmopolitan Women's Magazine sent a reporter out to take the class, and of course, the article was called How to Be a Psychic Spy and Have Multiple Orgasms.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Yeah, that's the article in Cosmopolitan. And it was hilarious. And it was because during the class I was talking about, somebody had asked a question about energy they were feeling. They were feeling really what was like what I would describe as kind of a Kundalini type effect, which many viewers do get when you're immersed in a session. And I was explaining this, and I even think I said, you might have an orgasm. I think I was joking around. Well, the Cosmo lady took it literally.
oh my gosh. Well, would this perhaps be one of the reasons why some in the remote viewing community were not too thrilled with whatever you were doing at the time?
There were a number of reasons. Certainly I had a fun style, joked around a lot in every class, which I'm doing again now. It makes it way more fun when you can just, bounce ideas back and forth and laugh and share things, share all kinds of funny stories. And I didn't take it in the same serious manner that those coming out of the military tradition did. They're very serious about their protocol. And one thing that I had done was I took the methodology and I decided to take out a lot of the militaristic and patriarchal language. I felt that was limiting. Like the word target, we're throwing that word around here. It is one of the established terms in remote viewing, but I don't like it because it implies a hit or a miss. It implies that you're a bullet, you're a gun, you're pointing at something, and you might miss the target. And my whole philosophy started to come together then. And it's a very simple philosophy, and it is this: you get what you get. And I believe that every piece of data in a session is 100% relevant. I don't believe we make anything up. I don't believe in things like storylines. I think that we have to work perhaps on our translation in a session. That's what I like. I like to use the word translation because you're taking an experience that you're having. And most of the time, it's an experience you've never had before. Maybe you've never been to the Taj Mahal, and that's what you're looking at. Or maybe you've never, you don't know anything about a particular battle in World War II, but that's what you're looking at. And so you're seeing things and trying to describe things that you don't have a basis for comparison. You don't know what this is. You can't recognize the equipment or the people or whatever. And so you do make comparisons or you use metaphor. And I think that's actually beautiful because those metaphors, comparisons, they often illustrate layers of complexity that relate to what you're looking at. And so that's back then is when I first started thinking about this in a very strong way. And now it is my most fundamental belief in remote viewing is you get what you get and that you need to honor every single piece of data. I think the best viewers are those that just get it all out there, do not worry about trying to figure out what's what. And post-session, you can do an analysis and deconstruct your data. And I do have new students do that. They have to go through session and they have to literally justify every single piece of data. Why did you put yellow? Why did you draw this? Why did you compare this to Disneyland? And it's beautifully illuminating, and it strengthens that language between your subconscious and your waking mind and your voice and your hand. and allows you to provide a more direct translation the next time you do a session.
And for those who aren't so familiar with controlled remote viewing as it was taught by Ingo and then by some of his students, traditionally you would take your analytic overlay, like, I'm reminded of Disneyland, and you would set it aside. You might still write it down and put AOL next to it, but then you just really, you take a short break and then come back and just try to disregard it. Although in stage 5, there is a tool to go in and deconstruct, but it's not that you're deconstructing throughout the entire session. It's just that's a separate exercise if you're finding yourself getting really stuck. But so what you're saying is that don't just discard it at one moment, but really work with it and try to understand how it really relates to your past and what about it is really relevant for you in this particular session. And what would you use as the term in place of target?
Experience. You're having an experience. You're going to go on an exploration. Exploration is another word that I like. I like exploration. I like experience. I used to use the word objective, which I think is less militaristic than target. But now I'm trying to make this even more inviting overall. And I'm now calling what I do mapping and not remote viewing. Although it's remote viewing, but I'm calling it mapping because we create this incredible collection of maps that allow you to do this deconstruction in the middle of a session and to find out how things are connected. Because in a traditional CRV type methodology, or even my old TDRV methodology, you would go through and different pages, you would do different exercises, you would do sketches, you would write down sensory information, little bits of data. You would get to the matrix section, which has columns, neat columns, and you go through. And so you get a bunch of discarnate data. It's all data that you don't know, how does this one relate to this one? Sometimes those things would come together and you would start writing more sentences or doing more complicated sketches. But I really wanted to explore, how can you actually take all the random pieces that you get and come up with a narrative that tells the story of your experience? Because we are natural storytellers as human beings. And I like the idea of thinking of a remote viewing session as a storytelling experience. That's what hopefully you're trying to do. You're having an experience and you're going to share that experience with someone else through drawing and through writing. We use a lot of color. We use textures, and we even do some 3D modeling. So it's all very fun. You feel like you're back in kindergarten in like the best way possible.
Yeah, I have found with controlled remote viewing that a lot of times there are just these pieces of data all over the place. And now a lot of times students are learned how at the very end to bring it together in a summary, like a narrative summary, or taking the sketches into a compilation, like a overall compilation sketch. How would your mapping depart from that?
So in mapping, you take a huge piece of paper and you have an assortment of writing utensils available to you. I always have crayons. I have colored markers, colored pencils, all kinds of things that produce different textures and colors. Because what I've found is intuitively, you're going to grab the thing that not only may directly show the color of what it is you're trying to sketch, but the choice of texture oftentimes can tell you something about it as well. And it's so interesting to see how all of these pieces come together. And so what you do is you start by, you kind of make a little determination at the beginning, but you can modify it as you go, which kind of maps you want to have on your first big mapping sheet. So you may have discovered that there are people, there's a group of people where you're viewing, where your experience, your exploration. And so You start perhaps by drawing them, and then you may have a conceptual map where you start writing down all of these interesting ideas that are coming to you conceptually, idea of a party, or there are mostly women and children, or, all your concept type things. And maybe you have a timeline, a map of time that you want to put there, or you may have an emotional map if this feels like a particularly emotional experience. And then what you do is you just start filling in all these different parts on this huge page, and you can add more areas. And then when you've developed it after a little while, you then take a little step back and say, okay, there are all these women here that I've drawn, all these women and young children. Now, how does this connect to these concepts? And so you can draw a line from the women to the concepts, in the act of doing that pulls out all this incredible data that tells you why they're there, what exactly they're doing. So you're connecting the data, and you connect it to all the other different kinds of maps that you decide to put on your page. And it's entirely up to you how you want to map. The first couple of maps people do, they're all over the place, and they're not sure what to do. But once they see other people doing it, then they want all in, and then you start grabbing colors. I just taught a 5-day class that ended last week. And one of the things that I gave everyone to experience was the filming of The Wizard of Oz. And I had a cool picture showing, Dorothy behind the scenes and the Munchkins and movie camera guy. And so one of the maps that one of the students did is incredible. She draws this young girl, and she pulls out yellow for the hair. And she draws like a big blue sash on this little girl's dress, which is exactly what Dorothy wore in the film. And then she was like, filling all these things. This was one of her first maps that she had ever done. And she was completely new to remote viewing. And then she grabs a yellow marker and draws this winding road, the yellow brick road. And then she's drawing like hatch marks in it to show that there's bricks. And then she's like, this is a journey. This is an important journey. And then she plots on this map. It became like a timeline map, every single thing that happened along the way, culminating in the castle and the wizard at the very end. It's glorious. She has meeting companions on the way. She has the cup where, she takes the sip and is, where the wicked witch gives her the potion. She had literally everything in here. And then I make everyone justify, talk about their narrative. Tell me the story. Tell me and without revealing ever what it is until after everyone has a chance to share what they did. And the way she talked about it was just so beautiful, because she was able to point out, she knew exactly from doing the mapping and connecting things, which parts of what she was drawing or writing were metaphor or a comparison. She was like, now this one's a metaphor, because when I connected it to this, I could tell it wasn't literal. And so it just blew my mind how well this works. Now, I've been doing it for years now, and this is, my own private practice. But now that I'm unleashing it out on the world, it's just blowing my mind how people are really loving it and truly having an incredible time. So, and then you can do a series of maps if you feel that it's warranted. And we've got other stuff we do too, but the mapping is so exciting. It does allow you to have a full experience and tell a full story.
One of the things I was drawn to about remote viewing was how when you have certain tools, physical tools available to you, that really does determine then what can be expressed intuitively. And before I got into remote viewing, I was doing primarily clairvoyant work where I would just sit and close my eyes and get imagery. And, that was great and everything. But when I started to even just use a piece of paper and a pen, there were all these things happening, body expression, just writing things that I didn't even know I was going to write till they emerged on the paper. And I was like, wow, it's not just about what's inside of us, but the tools that we use. And how we use them. And, then after some time, Courtney Brown was one of the first people to use a whiteboard where he would have his viewers stand up in front of the whiteboard, and you started to see all different things emerging on the screen, and the viewers and it was really interesting because even without them talking about this, you would see their gestures really matching what was happening in the target. And so I was like, wow, even just standing up and doing a session, like so much more can be expressed. And I know that you've really built on that as well.
Yes, it's definitely a whole body approach. Most viewers, most students in the class, they stand up during the mapping and you do see how they're moving. And I tell them, if you feel something in your arm or your stomach, make sure you get that out. Either tell it out loud, because you can record sessions as well, or get it out on your map, because our bodies hold such incredible rich data. It's not just all up in our noggins. I mean, the science has shown that we even have all kinds of neurons in our gut. That's the whole, going by your gut. It's literally, we have the same things we have in our brain, in our whole innards. And so it's important, I think, to recognize that we're full beings. It's not just a purely mental exercise. It should be physical. And you'll hear your breath catching, or maybe you'll start hyperventilating, or maybe you get really, really, really hot, or you feel cold. There's all kinds of reactions that your body can have that tells you something about the experience.
I know this is one of the reasons why those that worked with you years ago, still 20 years later, talk about their early training and just the benefits of your methods. So then, if you don't mind, let's go back. What happened? What happened so that suddenly we just couldn't find you anymore?
For quite a while, our classes and my home were being staked out by these unmarked vans, minivans, sometimes pickup trucks. They were always white, blacked out windows. You couldn't tell who was in them. And I lived on a cul-de-sac in Southern California at that time. And literally there would be 6 of them lined up in front of my home on the cul-de-sac. And if you went over, they wouldn't roll down the window. They wouldn't do anything. And I called the police a few times and nothing ever happened. And that escalated. I started getting phone calls with repeated threats, very, very graphic threats, talking about knifing me, strangulating me, sexually assaulting me. And then the threats started toward my children, who were young and at home at the time. They're all grown and out of the house now. But that was the final straw for me. There were so many of these incidences, and that mixed with a lackluster appreciation from some of the ex-military remote viewers just really made me feel, it's not worth it. The health of my family and my own mental sanity, it's not worth it. I can still work on things by myself. So I shut everything down, and I did it immediately. I didn't give anyone any warning. And I do regret that. I should have been a little more open with everyone, but everyone did know what I was up against. And I wasn't the only one being harassed. Others at TDS were also being harassed. And it felt life or death to me. It truly did.
Who were these people?
That is the big question, isn't it? I have remote viewed them as you do. And it's a kind of loosely related to the government, not direct government, but more like black ops kind of, paramilitary people that were hired to do this, hired to intimidate and try to get me to stop. And it worked. It really worked.
Around what year was this?
2003 is when I shut down.
Well, and do you have any theories about why someone would want to hire them, and why would they target you and your business as opposed to other remote viewers and businesses?
Yeah, and that's the real question. At the time, there was Farsight, and there were a number of schools centered around the different military instructors and CRV. There weren't a lot of different groups out there. It was still just a budding new field out there.
How much do you think it had to do with you being a woman, and then a woman that was more open with her language or maybe her sexuality? Did any of that play into it?
I'm not entirely sure, but I think because we had been getting a lot of press, we had a lot of interest, and we were looking at interesting things, not just what our clients wanted us to look at, but we were looking at some of the real big questions out there about extraterrestrial contact. When will the government disclose that aliens are real? We looked at the biggest secret in the United States, the biggest secret in the world. We oftentimes had just astounding data, things that would make you just stop and take a deep breath and really think about what you were looking at. We did push a lot of buttons, I think. And I think that maybe having a group that was growing and excited about what they are doing, start looking at some of the big hidden mysteries might have been threatening. That's pretty much what I kind of came to after a while, was that we were threatening because we were fun and people were enjoying it. A lot of times people learn remote viewing, and you know this from being involved in the field for a long time. They get excited at the beginning, but after a while, maybe they fall out of practice and they think, well, I should get back to it. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. And it's just a small percentage of people that really stick to it and that make it one of their life passions. And that's true for any hobby or interest out there. And so it's going, some people just want the initial experience and some people want to be great at it. And I think because we had a larger group that really was working hard, they were viewing every single day. We had just had a lot of people working in training and in viewer development. It was super fun. It was every day. It was a new adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of attrition in remote viewing classes. I talk to so many teachers, and yeah, like a lot of times, especially like with an ongoing class, about half the students will stop coming, even though they say, oh, I love the class, but this is so much work and my anxiety levels are going up. I don't want to be wrong, or, I feel bad that I didn't get to the homework assignment this week. And, there's really not been anything in the history of remote viewing, at least that was talked about, for helping students who are really hitting those emotional barriers. And the more pressure you put on, and I'm guilty of this too, because I'm like, we need to learn how to operate in a professional manner. We don't want to just hand in, something to a client that's not going to be useful. But, if you start to talk about professionalism to someone who they're coming in for the first time, the first week, you're just going to kill the joy there for them. And then also, just as you're talking about the modifications you've been making with somatics and mapping, it makes me think, like, what kind of person does it take to advance a methodology from when people are so focused on let's do things exactly how we were taught and how it was done in the past? How are we able to move the topic forward and improve things? And I think that can only happen when you have people that are creatives like yourself, who can think so much out of the box. And that's going to come with a very different type of personality. rather than somebody that's just so fixated on this is what worked before, let's keep doing it. And if anyone deviates from it, they need to be punished or it needs to be pointed out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was bashed all the time. There used to be forums out there. The social media has changed and everything since then. There wasn't really social media back then per se. And there was a lot of, people would slut shame me. People would laugh at my choice of what I was wearing. I was interviewed on CBS Sunday Morning, and I wore a Star Trek communicator pin, which I loved, and big Trekkie. And I was bashed by that from so many people in CRV. It was ridiculous that they were just pointing to that as if to say, can you believe this is who we have promoting remote viewing out there? This is just a travesty, I tell you. For a jewelry choice. But yeah, there was a lot of misogynistic type commentary. And I think that definitely the field has changed so much. There are a lot of strong women now involved in remote viewing, which I am absolutely thrilled to see, yourself being one of them. And I think that, intuition has always been a woman's art. It's always been considered something that belongs to women. And I think that we've needed to take back remote viewing and give it that more feminine touch and a less patriarchal view and more nurturing. New viewers need a lot of nurturing and a lot of care in training so that they can fully come into their own without fear of being imperfect. I think a lot of people, when they first start learning remote viewing, they're scared. They're scared to do it. They don't want to fail.
We need people like yourself, to advance the field forward, because the fact is there are still so many errors that happen in remote viewing sessions, or like you said, bits of data everywhere that just turn out to be like, oh, this is interesting, but people can't make sense of it. There is still a lot of problems in remote viewing. And I feel like you're offering something here that can bring us, at least a few steps forward, if not several.
Thank you. I think so too. I'm seeing such remarkable results for myself and now for my students with this, where they are able to deconstruct in the middle of a session and understand and recognize what is metaphor, what is a comparison. And when they present their work, they talk about it in those terms. And no one's done that before. Teach the student to recognize in the middle. And it really does open up. I think that, I'm really excited to see other people out there give this a whirl. I'm doing an online free lecture series where every few weeks I'm going to do a new lecture. And over time, I will go through in great depth everything that I'm doing with the hopes that people give it a whirl. I would love to see what others do with this. And others may have ideas about it. They may think, wow, this is really great. And how about if I try it this way? And that's, I think, how we're going to have real change, is getting outside of the restrictive protocols and giving people a chance to experiment and have some fun. It should be fun. It really should be fun.
Do people do as well with mapping when they're just at home by themselves, working by themselves, or does it really take this group experience?
No, my students, from my last class, I set up a private Facebook group for the class, and I'm doing that for each of the several classes I'm teaching. And I have been giving them things to experience, like a daily homework. And, and it's up to them. But so far, everyone's been doing it. And then they've been posting on their photo albums of all their mapping pages in great color. And they're really stepping outside of their comfort zone, actually, just since the class. They're kind of wanting to one-up each other, which is actually kind of cool. So they're having a lot of fun, making it as big and bold and colorful and connected as possible.
And so a couple other questions. I know we're moving back and forth in time. Now, someone said, oh, you're going to interview Prue, so you have to ask her about what happened years ago with the whole Hail Bop scenario. Is that something that you were involved in or you can share with us?
Well, that's that was at Farsight, the Farsight Institute, and is a very complicated scenario. Farsight was set up, I believe, 100% in that whole situation. And just out of respect for Courtney, I don't really talk about that whole scenario and what happened. And because I know he doesn't talk about it either. The viewers there at Farsight looked at the comet, and then there was that crazy group that decided to off themselves, and the two were not connected. They were not connected, but Farsight was vilified because they dared to remote view something. And it's wrong, but it's another way to take somebody out of the picture and to try to make these connections that aren't exactly real connections to try to discredit somebody or a whole institution.
The things that I've found when talking to people that are just even considering starting to explore their intuitive abilities, whether with remote viewing or any other modality, is the level of fear and responsibility they feel with the information they're getting. And I understand that, but also, like I've told students, well, do you put this level of heaviness and responsibility anytime you speak to someone? Like, you're constantly talking to your friends and giving people advice. We're constantly sharing information. That's what we do. But then when it comes to intuitive information, it seems to be that there's all this pressure, so much weight on top of it. And we know any kind of information from any source is not going to be 100% accurate. And so how do you handle that? How do you handle that level of responsibility, or at least all the emotion around it, when you're either personally dealing with clients because you do want to do a good job, you don't want to mess anything up for anybody, but what would you say about all of that?
Yeah, I think that if you're going to work with clients, you need to be able to have an honest conversation with your potential clients and explain to them exactly what remote viewing is, what it looks like. And oftentimes in the past, I would even teach them a little, even just something basic like ideograms, so that they could understand what it feels like. And then I would always show clients a wide range of different kinds of data and explain the different kinds of data that we might get in any given session or any given project, because sometimes you're going to have your visual data. Sometimes it's going to be more conceptual. There's a wide range depending on what the target is. And so I think that client education is so important. If you're providing this as a service, they have to know what it is, what it isn't, and you can provide with all these different kinds of caveats. This is what a sample report looks like. This is the kind of, a narrative that I'll provide in the report. Here is what the supporting pages and documents would look like, so that they have an understanding and can then make an educated decision whether this looks like something they would be interested in. And generally, if you have a client who's law enforcement, well, they're going to be very visually oriented. They're going to want to see the sketches and pictures that look like the missing person or the location where a piece of evidence is hiding or where a criminal is hiding out. So, for a client like that, you're going to want to provide some very highly visual data, but you can provide other kinds of data as well. But I think clients like law enforcement, that's where their comfort zone is going to be. But other clients, if you're looking at some kind of a technology transfer type sessions where a client is working on a new technology and they're having some troubles and they want to know if remote viewing can help. So can you look at the solutions to these problems, or can you look at how this might work in the future? And again, those kinds of sessions, I think some of the most valuable data is the conceptual data, because oftentimes what you draw isn't going to have like it's not going to be drawn to scale per se, or in a way that would make it any easier for someone to do a CAD drawing and produce this item. But if you can get all the concepts nailed down and explain everything in great detail, then that customer will probably be quite happy. There's so many cool applications for client work in remote viewing. It's not all aliens and UFOs, even if that is one of my favorite things to look at.
So around the year 2003, you pretty much, from people who were still left, just left the scene. And some people say you disappeared, but you didn't really disappear. You were still on this planet, still living your life. What did you do during that time? And what was it like to now suddenly step away from all of this?
It was hard stepping away, and it was also quite freeing. I did so many things. It's insane. I moved to New Mexico. I became an Avon lady and sold cosmetics door to door, and I wrote extensively about that. And I had a blog that ended up with like a crazy amount of readers. I became a famous blogger, Avon blogger. True story. And then I stopped selling Avon, and I started an alternative newspaper up in Las Vegas, New Mexico, called Gallinas, which means hens, and was arts, culture, and community at the focus on our Spanish community there in Las Vegas. And I started teaching. I taught 8th grade at an alternative school for kids that it was a outward bound style school for kids that couldn't make it in the regular school system. And then I went back to school and just kind of messed around trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I ended up getting my master's degree in digital forensics and working in that, which I still do to this day. I do consulting work. And I owned and published a cryptocurrency magazine that was dedicated to Dogecoin. I don't know. I've just had a lot of fun. I've done so many things. I can't even tell you. And I became a beekeeper, and that's been one of the big passions of my life since. And I am a certified beekeeper, and I've taught beekeeping to others, and I help rescue bee swarms in the spring and help new beekeepers learn how to take good care of their colonies.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure people would like to know, do you ever get stung? And are you afraid of getting stung?
Oh, I'm not afraid. I've been stung a number of times, of course, as every beekeeper is, but I don't even feel it anymore. It just feels like a quick little prick, and that's it. I really, they're so gentle. It's unusual to get stung. Usually it's because I'm squishing a bee by accident, or I step on one in my bare feet out there. But they're super gentle creatures. They're just so beautiful. They work so hard, and it's a feminine monarchy, which I love. It's the queen bee, and all of her workers are female. It's only a handful of male drones in any hive. And in November, the females will kill all the males and drag them out of the hive so that they won't use up all the resources throughout winter.
That's a powerful metaphor.
It really is.
And are you collecting the honey? And if so, do you keep it for yourself or do you sell it?
I keep it for myself. I give it away to friends and family. Here in New Mexico, we've been under drought conditions now for it's climate change. The weather patterns have been changing. We don't get a lot of rain here in the high desert. And so the bees here do not produce as much honey as those would, say, in Michigan or someplace that gets a lot more water and has more temperate climate. But so you have to leave enough honey for the bees. That's what they use over the winter to feed themselves. But I will collect some every year, and I like to enjoy it. It's the most delicious honey ever.
Wow, that is so cool. And then as far as your work as a
digital forensics expert or analyst or consultant. So what that is in digital forensics is you are able, you do law enforcement work or corporate work. Generally, what you do is you are essentially a detective that can look on any electronic device, whether it's your iPhone or an Android phone or someone's hard drive or an external hard drive, and you can recreate anything that they've done or find out what they've done, what they've downloaded, where they've hidden Bitcoin. It's used a lot in different kinds of law enforcement, criminal cases, divorce cases. That's a big one because, sometimes one partner or the other is trying to hide some money, and you can follow the movement of all these different kinds of assets. You can recreate files that have been deleted. Nothing's ever really deleted. So that's another big part of digital forensics, is being able to recreate or to find secret messages, because sometimes people, especially in different criminal enterprises, they may hide secret messages inside of photographs, for example. It's all done under the surface, and that's what a digital forensics analyst does. It's kind of fun. You get to be a detective.
So one of the reasons I became really fascinated by you was because I read your first book, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was called Intentions, the Intergalactic Bathroom Enlightenment Guide. And even though that sounds really pretty silly, when I read that book, I was blown away. I was blown away by your writing style. I just loved it. It was very unique and very clear. The book was very personal, revealing, but you also talked about this experience, this repeated experience of having communications with an alien in your bathroom. And I always wondered, was this experience more like on a clairvoyant level where you would just get these visions, or did you feel like there was actually a physical being standing in your bathtub?
I honestly felt there was a physical being standing. He even left footprints in the bath mat.
And weren't you scared? I mean, the first time you saw him, did you just stay there or did you dart out of there?
I was scared. And it was that kind of scared where you're frozen in place and you can't move and you can't scream because you're so scared. And it happened almost every night, same time of night, 2:30 in the morning-ish. And it went on for a couple of years, not every single night, but many nights. And after a while, I just got used to him. He would never say anything out loud. It was always this, there wouldn't always be a thought ball, but sometimes there was a thought ball and sometimes he'd just stand there with those big eyes just looking.
And when you would talk to him, would you see him as clear as you're seeing me? Can you tell us a little bit about the first time you saw him and what that was like?
Yeah, he's short, looks like your kind of standard little gray alien. I called him the gray dude. And he would speak to me telepathically, but it wouldn't be a linear conversation. It would be what I call in the book thought balls. That's what it felt like. It felt like this huge packet of information, all completely tangled and twined up, that was just inserted into my brain. And it would take a long time to deconstruct these. I'd pull one thread it's just like remote viewing. I came to think of it as too. It's just like that. It's this amazing experience, and you have to keep deconstructing it to find what the truth is inside there. And when I wrote that book, I had done what I could to try to explain what these experiences were like, but it wasn't like anything else you could possibly experience. So I had to use a lot of metaphor and analogy and comparisons, just like you do in remote viewing, to try to get the ideas across. And since then, though, I have been working on the thought bowls. They're still in my head, just like the day that I was given them. And I'm working on another book where I'm going to talk about all those messages, and it'll be quite different than the first book, but probably just as fun a read. I love writing. Writing is, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a writer more than anything. And one cool thing about remote viewing is you get to do a lot of writing. So very happy with how things have turned out.
When the thought ball came in, what did that feel like?
It had a physical feel to it. I could literally feel it entering into my brain.
Well, and going back to focus a little bit more on the actual physical experience.
It would feel, like being poked with a stick, but inside your head. I felt it like a poke.
You walk into the bathroom, there's this little alien being. So was he in the bathtub or just standing outside of the bathtub? Was his feet actually on the ground?
We were on the bath mat right next to the bathtub. It was this blue kind of shaggy bath mat that I had, and he would stand and his head would come right underneath the towel bar.
I think you were married at the time, or you had a partner with you. What did he say or do? And did he see the alien?
He never saw it, but he did always feel like he couldn't get up around that time. So he felt like he was stuck in bed. Because there was a time when he was going to try to get up to see it, but he never did. It was a lot like that. Would have friends, remote viewers come over, and no one would manage to stay up, or wait up. No one would manage to make it in that bathroom. It just became like this comedy of errors all the time.
They were going unconscious?
I think so. I think people, they just like got an idea to do something else in that moment, or it was like they were being directed not to have that encounter.
Now, what about cameras? Did you ever think of bringing a camera in?
I never did. I did put out there on the forums at the time, like, hey, anyone wants to set up cameras, be my guest. And nobody ever took me up on it. He did leave footprints in the bath mat, and I did take a photo of the footprints, which somewhere I have in one of those plastic tubs somewhere.
Were you ever embarrassed to go to the bathroom? Like, would he stand there while you peed?
I never actually went when he was in there. So I think if I had to go, then I didn't have to go anymore.
The important questions in life you have to cover. Yeah, I had an unusual experience where not too long ago, I was really frustrated because we've been renovating our house, and my partner does not like to plan ahead or do decorating until he's gotten one part done. Like, you can't think ahead a week or two. You just have to have everything done before you can even think about the next step. And I was just like, I need really some decorating help here. And this is really frustrating because I'm not really good at this. And I laid down in bed just thinking, how are we going to get through this project? And as I was just starting to go to sleep, I suddenly had this image of this alien slam into my head. Now, this was clairvoyant. I didn't see him with my eyes, but like, why is there suddenly this alien with these big eyes staring at me? And then it switched to a picture of the living room area, like right by a corner where these windows meet. And he showed me a picture of a built-in seating area, like where the table could go with these really nice built-in seats, which I had never considered.
I love this. I love this. Decorating tips.
I did think back to your book and I was like, wow, there's something similar here. But I knew it was still internal, or at least that's how it felt. I didn't see him physically.
And these experiences, so many people have unusual experiences like that where they have, their contactee or they have encounters with something strange and they all have these like strange feelings and memories surrounding them where they can see something, somebody else can't see it. Or maybe two people have some kind of shared experience, but later when they compare notes, they realize it was completely different for each one. I think that a lot of times these experiences, who knows why they happen, who's actually in charge of this whole crazy life. I just think mine works for me and that it's super cool.
Thinking Aloud is a non-profit endeavor. Your contributions to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation make a meaningful difference in our ability to produce new videos. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine or order a beautiful printed copy.